It's so nice to see you again. I am super happy that we were able to keep our class, which is awesome. So we're able to keep our class as long as we keep the number of students that we currently have. So make sure that you stay on top of your materials, submit all of your assignments so that we are able to continue keeping our class. With that being said, I already graded your assignments that you submitted last week. So your grades are up to date when it comes to them. Quick reminder, make sure that you read chapters 3 to 6 this week. Make sure that you take your quizzes and submit your discussion posts on a timely manner. Remember that you have until Friday at 11:59 p.m. to submit all of this work. And today we are actually going to be talking, we're going to go into a little more in depth as to what audience analysis is and how it applies to our study of argumentation. And we're also going to be talking about the metaphor and how metaphor is an important method for kind of like explaining your argument and helping your audience visualize it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And also, for those of you who might be wondering, I will be posting the recordings of our lectures from last week on Canvas after our lesson today. So watch out for that. So really quickly, let me share my screen so that we are able to get started with the first part of our lecture today. So like I said, we are going to be talking about chapters 3 and 4 today, and on Thursday, we're going to be talking about chapters 5 and 6. So chapter 3 talks about audiences and it just focuses on the audience and the importance of catering to your audience, of understanding your audience so that you're able to create an argument that it is appealing for the group of people that you are addressing. So the objectives for this chapter are: we should be able to define the universal audience, and the universal audience is going to be a concept that is going to be very helpful when you are analyzing for your next paper, which is the one that we have coming up, which is your visual argument paper. The universal audience is going to be really, really important for that. So defining and understanding the universal audience. And then we're also going to be talking about the idea of presence and what are the different ways in which we can create presence in an argument. Awesome, let's get started. So the first thing that we need to talk about is what is audience analysis. So audience analysis is incredibly important as an arguer, because in order to be able to create an effective argument, you have to know who your audience is. So you need to appeal to their experiences, you need to appeal to their value system, you need to know who they are so that you can craft your argument in a way that it connects with them, not only at their value level, but at their experience level. And that's the first thing that you have to do when you are going to engage in an argument or in a debate. Know who your audience is, get to know their experiences and their value system, get to know how much they know and what it is that they're expecting. That way you're able to craft an argument that meets not only their needs, but to some extent it kind of meets their expectations of what they want. So next question is, how do you get to know your audience? A lot of you are probably wondering, well, how do we get to know people? It's really hard to get to know one person. So how are we supposed to know the particular audience that we're talking about? It seems like it will be impossible. Well, there are different ways that we can do this. So the first thing is you need to know who they are. So in our case, our audience for our presentations are your classmates, right? College students who attend Pasadena City College, who are aiming to transfer to another school. Students who are in their late teens to about late 20s. Usually that's the range that I see. So that's kind of the way that you have to start identifying the qualities of your audience. And you have to ask yourself these questions while you are making notes and analyzing your audience. Can you identify who they are? Do you know basic things about them? Is your audience a very complex audience? Is there multiple audiences? So in some cases, in college classes, you'll have students who are returning students, who are students who are much older, are coming back from school, already have grown kids, already have had a full, a good time working in the workforce. So you might have different audiences within the audience of Pasadena City College students, right? You might have a more complex audience than that. And this makes it hard, right? Obviously, it makes it hard to figure out who is my audience and how am I going to create an argument that's going to meet their needs. And another way that you can, when we're assessing our audience, when we are getting to know them, we have to, look at demographics. So when we talk about demographics, we're talking about characteristics of what makes up your audience. So for example, if you've ever filled out a survey or a job application, or even the application to attend college, right? You probably have to fill that out for Pasadena. They ask you questions that's like, what's your, what's your gender, your age group, your ethnicity, your race. They ask you all these questions because through those characteristics, they're able to get a little more information and make assumptions about who you are, what are some things that you might be interested to, some resources that you might find useful. So when we talk about demographics, like I was saying, it's kind of like the statistical data that you get from people, like the statistical data based on the characteristics you get from people. And it could be, things like such as, age, could be, younger versus older adults would be one example. So for example, when we're thinking about like younger generations, they might be more in tune with technology, more in tune with popular culture, what is trendy right now, as opposed to adults who are probably not on top of slang or pop culture, and they are not like so with it when it comes to technology. So as you can see, there is a difference between the type of language or the type of examples that we can use. If we have an audience that has a majority of older adults, you're going to have to use different examples rather than just like popular culture or things that you see on TikTok or on the internet, as opposed to the younger generation. So age is an example of a demographic. We also have social affiliations. This is really funny. Like, for example, like when you think of an Illuminati member, you think a few things, right? So for those of you who have heard about the Illuminati, what are some things that you have heard about these people? And you can put it down in the chat if you want to. What are some things that we have heard about the Illuminati? That's a social affiliation. Okay, yes. So thank you, Imelda. Wealth. And John seconds you on that. Like one of the things that you hear is that they have wealth, right? And they're also like really important. And they have like some important ranks in whether it be government or society. Yeah, social status, that they control government. They control a bunch of things, right? They control the outcome of different things. So when we think of like people that are Illuminati members, that's what we think about. Or if we think about people who are part of the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party versus the Communist Party versus the Green Party, each one of them has, a set of qualities that we attach to those folks who belong to those different groups, right? So that would be also an example of a demographic. We also have gender, and masculine and feminine, male and sex will be male, female. But I have this really interesting question for you all. Do you know the difference between communication styles between masculine and feminine people? And when I mean masculine and feminine, I don't necessarily mean that masculine is only males and feminine is only females. You can actually have masculine characteristics and be female, and have feminine characteristics and be male. So do you all know what the difference in communication is between masculine and feminine communication? I'm curious to know if anybody has heard about this.
Is this referring to like identifiers, like ways to describe certain like jobs, or like in language, we have like certain things that end with an A and are, I guess, heard as like a feminine tone. Is it anything to do with language in that sense?
Yeah, you're going on the right track. So you were saying the kind of like the way that we have the conversations. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about a feminine communication style, and again, when I say feminine, it's not necessarily meaning that it's attached to women or men or
Right.
anything like that. But feminine communication style is focused on the idea of nurturing. Usually when
Mm.
you have feminine communication style, it's more talking for the purposes of getting to know each other, creating a connection and creating a relationship. That's usually how like feminine communication style works, as opposed to masculine communication style is more task oriented and just getting things done. So
Got it.
masculine focus more on like is more task oriented, and feminine style is more emotional, social oriented. So research has shown that. And again, like you can be a male with very feminine communication style, or you can be a female with a very masculine communication style. So that would be also an example of another demographic. And last thing is we have culture. Culture has a lot to do. Your culture tells us a lot about you, right? Depending on the culture that you belong to, your way of viewing the world is different from culture to culture, right? And I have another like really interesting question to ask you all, but do you know what is the difference between Western cultures, in other words, like the US and like, on the Western side, how do they view arguments different from the rest of the world? Has anybody heard about that?
What do you mean by the question?
So
Like,
how do Western cultures, AKA like the US, view argumentation differently from other cultures?
I guess we're known to be more confrontational.
Thank you, Melda. Yes, so Western cultures are definitely seen to be more confrontational and more kind of like have more a direct approach or an aggressive approach to argument, as opposed to some Eastern cultures that see argument as something that can ruin a friendship or something that can be extremely detrimental to our relationship, and it is avoided at all costs, right? So we tend to want to address the argument. We want to go in, express our opinions, and it's seen as an aggressive style, as
Mm.
opposed to other cultures, specifically Eastern cultures, that see an argument as kind of like something that's going to ruin their relationship. So they try to avoid it at all costs. So that would be something else that would be good to know, right? So if you have an audience that doesn't, is not very aggressive, doesn't take arguments in the most like, positive way, you might want to stay away from encouraging them or engaging in some type of conduct that might seem aggressive. And again, all of these qualities are helpful for you to get to know your audience and deciding how you want to frame your argument. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is one of the most important concepts that you are going to get to know when it comes to argumentation. And this concept is called the universal audience. Now, let me give you a little bit of background of the scholars who came up with the universal audience so that you get a better idea as to why, like where they come from and how they came up with this theory. So Perlman and Obrecht-Siteka were two scholars that they were actually like researching rhetoric during the time of like one of the world wars. Like it was like one of the time during the world wars where it was like really intense, and they were just trying to see like why, I think it was World War II specifically, like why is it that the advertisement that specifically like, Nazi Germany was using, like how come it worked on people? Like how did people buy into these things, right? Like obviously what the things that they were doing, they're horrible things. So like how is it that people were quickly persuaded and were able to go with it and not even think about it or question it? So they were thinking like, what the heck is going on with these people? Like how come like this happens? Like how do we get to avoid another world war? Like how do we make this go away and not make it happen ever again? How do we solve issues without going to war? So they said, well, maybe the reason why, these arguments work, or the reason why we haven't been able to solve the problems without going to war, is because we haven't put everybody on an equal footing. We haven't appealed to the entire world as a whole to make it seem that like, the conversation that we're going to have is going to benefit everyone. They were thinking, we have to make arguments appealing to everyone. We have to start by making everything appealing to everyone. However, How do you do that, right? Everybody's so different. And that's one of the reasons why the World War started, right? Because each one of us had different ideals. We had different countries had different expectations and different goals, and that's how it began. So how do you make it work? How do you make sure that everybody is on, the same footing, that everybody understands? Well, they came up with the concept of the universal audience. Now, before we get started, I want to explain that the universal audience is not something that is attainable. And the reason why, it's because it's more of a mind exercise. You cannot please everybody, obviously. And this exercise just helps you cover as much, as many people as you possibly can when you're preparing your argument. But obviously you're not going to be able to please everyone. So like I said, it is a mind exercise, and this mind exercise basically encourages you, as you're preparing and researching your argument, it prepares you to look for information and resources that make your argument compelling to practically everyone who will hear it. Or again, since it's not attainable to please everybody, to the majority, the largest amount of people, you want to make sure that your argument is compelling and appealing to everyone. Now, like I said, this is not something that can be attainable 100%. There will always be people that disagree. But Ulbricht, Titeka, and Perlman just wanted people to cover their bases, to make sure that they're doing in-depth research to be able to reach the majority of people as possible. And you're wondering, okay, cool, this sounds like a really awesome concept. How do you do this, right? Seems virtually impossible. Well, they actually came up with a really cool way of doing this. And I'm going to show you right now. So how do you do it, right? It's impossible. So how do you do it? They say, well, you can start your argument with objective facts or objective truths. So let's get started with the first one, which is objective facts. They said that when you are bringing up an objective fact, you have to bring up a topic that everybody will agree that is true, that has been scientifically proven that is something that it is true, okay? So the example that I have is the Earth is round. The majority of people will agree with you that the Earth is round. Obviously, there's a small, there's a small group of people, which are the Flat Earth Society, who will totally challenge us on this topic, right? But the majority of people, again, trying to reach as much of the universal audience as we can, the majority of people is going to agree with you that the Earth is round, right? It's an objective fact. It's something that has been researched, has been scientifically proven. Majority of people will agree with you. So you can start with an objective fact when you open your argument to make sure that you're kind of like getting people on the same, at the same place, at the same level, that you get them to just accept your argument like that. The second thing that they said to use is what's called an obvious truth. Now, the difference between an objective fact and an obvious truth is that an objective fact is something that has been scientifically proven, and the majority worldwide will accept this concept because, again, it has been scientifically proven. And usually when we have scientific discoveries, it spreads around the world and mostly everybody knows that, right? The majority of the world, of the Earth population, I hope so, will believe that the Earth is round. And obvious truths, on the other hand, are particular to a culture or a group of people. So depending on which group of people or culture you're talking to, their obvious truths are going to change. So for example, like we were talking about before, like in the Western culture, usually we embrace head-on arguments, we embrace the direct type of argumentation. So for us, that's true. That's an obvious truth for our group of people. However, if you were to go to another country that doesn't view it the same way, that's not an obvious truth for them. So they were saying that an obvious truth is more cultural, specific to a community, as opposed to an objective fact that can be applied worldwide. So an example of an obvious truth that I have is cheating on your partner is horrible, right? So a good portion of our community would believe that cheating on your partner is not a good thing. However, there are exceptions to that rule, right? So we have communities in which, cheating is not really a thing because they have open marriages. So a group of people who engage in that would not consider, that cheating on your partner is horrible because it's technically not cheating. That would be an example of that. You also have people that don't even believe that humans can't be faithful. There are some people who would say that evolutionary wise, humans are not meant to be monogamous. So this is not something that applies. But again, to the majority of a particular community, they would think that cheating on your partner is horrible. So again, you can use either or. So when you're using an obvious truth, you have to make sure that that particular community accepts it and believes in it, as opposed to an objective fact that the majority of people around the world would believe in. But that's how Ulrich Titeka and Perlman said that that's how you can create that mind exercise of the universal audience, by using objective facts and obvious truths. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Last thing that I wanted to talk about in this chapter before I jump onto the ornamental metaphor is the idea of creating presence. Now, I don't know about y'all, but there are speeches that when you listen to them, they stay in your mind, right? They just like stay there. They're just so compelling. They're amazing, like great, like amazingly crafted, right? And the main example of one of those amazing speeches that kind of like sticks in your head would be the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. And we also have the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King, right? Those are some great speeches that we studied when we were in high school, middle school, well-known speeches, because there's a reason why they're so well known and well loved. And it's because the speakers in those speeches created presence. What do I mean by presence? When Ulrich Titeka and Perlman talk about presence, they said, you have to make the argument, you have to make the topic important to the audience. You have to show them why it's relevant, why they need to continue thinking about it, like why it's important and vital for them to listen to this information. And well, how do you do that, right? Well, repetition. If you think about the Martin Luther King speech of I Have a Dream, there is repetition throughout the speech, right? We have the I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. That's probably the most remembered part of the speech by everyone, right? And we remember that because repeating it over and over again was showing us that, wow, like, we need to listen to this person because they have a dream and they keep repeating that this is a dream that they want to make reality. It's important, we have to listen because of the repetitiveness of the speech. The next thing that you can use is figurative language. Again, when we have, for example, the Gettysburg Address, there's a lot of figurative language in the Gettysburg Address. Same thing in the I Have a Dream speech. A lot of figurative language like similes, metaphors, alliteration, all those like cool things that you learn in high school English and in your introductory English class at PCC. All of those figurative language techniques are great to get the audience to just imagine in their head and make the ideas that you are sharing with us come alive. Next thing is focus on style and the delivery. So again, with Martin Luther King, he had a lot of pauses that created emphasis and moments for people to think and reflect on what he was sharing. And that's a stylistic choice that he made. It made those moments even more powerful by giving people time to think about it or by emphasizing certain areas. So again, your style of speaking, even like the style of your body language that you use is going to create that presence for the audience. So again, one of the things that I want us to take away from this chapter is that one, we need to focus on the universal audience, make sure that we're covering all of our bases, use obvious truths and objective facts. And lastly, we want to make sure that our argument is appealing to people. We want to create that idea of presence, that it is relevant to their lives, that they need to hear your message. And by using these techniques, you're able to do so. Questions before I move on to the metaphor, which is the most important part of chapter 4. We all seem good. We all seem really good. And I know that these concepts are a little dry, but I promise that it gets better with time. So let me quickly bring you up to the other chapter that we're going to be discussing, which is chapter 4. And chapter 4 talks about language. And a lot of the stuff that chapter 4 talks about, I kind of talked about at the very beginning when we talked about chapter 1. But the area that I want to focus on when it comes to chapter 4 is the metaphor. The idea of metaphor is a very difficult one to understand, and that's what I'm going to focus on. But before I get started with the idea of metaphor, I just kind of wanted to go over one more thing when it comes to chapter 4. And when we're talking about chapter 4, I want us to understand what it means that language has an epistemic function. So there were, how many of you have heard of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis?
I have.
You have, Imelda? Do you remember what it is?
An educated guess. A hypothesis, something that you think and can be proven to possibly be true or can be examined.
Good, you're on the right track.
Usually in the form of a question.
You're on the right track. So Sapir-Whorf were scholars. One of them was an anthropologist, the other one was a linguist. And they went to study the Inuit cultures, which are like the cultures that are like in the Arctic, Antarctic, right? So kind of like similar to Eskimos. They're called the Inuit cultures. So they went to study them. They kind of wanted to see how they were living and all of that. Now they noticed that this particular culture had different ways of calling snow. So if you think about it, when we look at snow, to us, snow is snow, right? So we have words for snow storms like blizzards and things like that, but we don't really have different words for different types of snow, do we? Not really. So the scholars were saying, well, these people have probably over 75 plus words to describe snow. So there's first day snow, second day snow, runny snow, deep snow, shallow snow. They had different words to describe those types of snow. And these scholars were saying, well, maybe because they have all these types of language, the language that they have shapes the reality. Obviously, like we don't have different ways of calling snow, so we don't see the difference or the important, but to them, having all these ways of label them makes the concepts real, right? And they're the ones who kind of like got into this debate whether language creates reality or shapes reality, or does our reality shape the language that we use? So it's kind of like a discussion that goes back and forth. Does language create reality, or does our reality create the need for us to call things certain ways, right? Let me give you another example. Imelda, go ahead.
I was gonna say, or to categorize or make categories, and for us to process, and whenever we hear certain words, we can picture and identify objects.
Perfect, I love that. So again, they were going back and forth. Does language make our reality, or does our surroundings make us create these words? Let me give you another example, and I love that you brought that up, Imelda. There's another example. So how many of you knew that sexual harassment wasn't really a thing? For the longest time, sexual harassment wasn't a thing. In the 50s, 60s, bosses would smack their secretaries on their booty, comment on their physical appearance, hit on them and things like that. And that wasn't seen as a bad thing. Sexual harassment became a term that was coined in around the 70s. That's when it became a thing. But before that, they were just bosses. Your boss was just, being your boss.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of scholars are arguing that, again, because we didn't have a word to call that behavior until we came up with the word sexual harassment, then it became a reality. So it kind of goes back and forth, but some people would say, well, the behavior was still happening, so it was a real thing. But again, until we had a word to call it by, there were no repercussions for those actions. Right. So it kind of goes back and forth. So one of the things that again, it's something that's up for grabs for communication scholars is, does language make our reality, or does our reality make the need for us to create certain language? And the answer is partially. It does a little bit of both, right? So with the example of sexual harassment, yeah, I kind of did that. And with the example of the snow, yeah, kind of like the surroundings of snow kind of made language. So it kind of goes back and forth. And again, there's not a definite answer in that, but the reason why I bring this up is because to some extent, language does shape the way that we view the world to some extent, partially. And that's why when we're thinking about arguments, it's really important to look at language, because the language that we use is going to create a certain, it's going to create a certain way of us looking at the argument. It's going to create an outlook for that. And that's when we get into the metaphor. So the thing that I wanted to talk to you all about is the metaphor. Now, we have heard about the metaphor back in high school English when we when we say that one thing is the other thing, or when we are comparing two things without using the word like, right? That's usually the definition for a metaphor. When it comes to argumentation, we take it a step further. So the metaphor that you're all used to is called the ornamental metaphor. So the ornamental metaphor is a typical metaphor that compares two things without using the word like. My example is from a Taylor Swift song that used to be my favorite Taylor Swift song from back in the day, from her like really like early beginning albums, which was Tim McGraw. That's what the song was called. And one of the lines in that song said, "The moon was a spotlight on the lake." That's a metaphor. Obviously the moon was not really a spotlight, but it kind of did look like, because it was really dark and you could see the spotlight of the moon on the lake. Very beautiful, very romantic, nice, right? That's usually the type of metaphor that we're used to, which is the ornamental metaphor. Now, the argumentative metaphor takes it up to the next level. And the argumentative metaphor is saying, hey, let's compare two things that have nothing to do with each other. Let's compare them to one another, right? And let's create that comparison. So my example is here. Colleges are a business. Keeping students satisfied and meeting their goals is what we need to do. Now, obviously, a business, like, when you think about like a burger joint, or if you think about Bank of America, or if you think, about a grocery store, you don't usually think that a grocery store compares to a college, right? That's usually not something that crosses our minds. Two different things, two very different areas, etc. But when we take those two things and we compare them to one another and we draw the conclusions, it kind of gives you an emotion, it gives you a feeling, a vibe. So after hearing colleges are a business, keeping students satisfied and meeting their goals is what we need to do, what kind of feeling do you get from this argumentative metaphor? What feeling or vibe does it give you? Imelda?
Right away, like I felt like it's an investment, like a transaction, like for example, paying for school. And so it's like they have to be able to satisfy my needs as a student in the college.
Good. I love that you brought that up. So you see it as an investment, right? When you go to a business, when you go to a grocery store, when you go to Whole Foods or like, Vons or whatever, and you're doing your grocery store, you expect food to be there. You expect to be able to find things and to get the help that you need so that you're satisfied with your purchases, right? Good. So it's kind of like an investment too. If you are, investing in a company, or if you are purchasing a car, you expect the best results to be satisfied, that they need to cater to you. Kind of like what John was saying here in the chat as well, that they're here for you and all of that. Ooh, this class is such a positive class. I love it. My past classes weren't so positive about that. Some of my past classes were saying that this gave them like a negative vibe, because they're saying that they only see you as a number, and customers always right, and we just want to get you in, get you out, get you satisfied, bring in the next income in, next paycheck, next tuition rate, get them out. Kind of like how the business does, like they bring you in and getting you out as fast as possible so that we can make the most amount of revenue. Some students got that vibe. So again, the whole purpose of the argumentative metaphor is to kind of like compare two things that are on the surface are completely different. Like again, like a college and a business are completely two different things. But the more we keep drawing those conclusions, again, it creates a feeling or a vibe for us that gets us in the right frame of thought when it comes to the argument. So for example, if you were trying to get students, like you were saying, Imelda, like you were saying, John, like if you were trying to get students to think positively about college and thinking that college is an investment in their future, this will be a great metaphor to use, right? Or if you want students to like, think of college as more than just being a number, maybe you want to tweak it a little bit so that it gives you that feeling that you're just a number, that you're just one more customer, and that it's not individualized to you, it's just getting you out and getting the revenue in. So it just kind of depends how you phrase the argumentative metaphor and the kind of vibe that you want the audience to get. And that's what makes it so powerful. Questions, comments, anything? We good? Seems like we're doing good. Awesome, cool. So I'm gonna let you go today because I feel like we covered a lot of stuff, covered a lot. Make sure that you complete your assignments, make sure that you're keeping up with the readings, because I'm only covering snippets and parts of, the majority of the reading that you have to do on the chapter. I'm just covering snippets here and there, the parts that I think you're going to have more difficulty understanding. So keep up with the reading, make sure that you're completing the assignments, and I will see you all on Thursday. And on Thursday, we'll be talking about some pretty dense stuff. So be ready to get in that mindset because we're going to be talking about some philosophical concepts on Thursday. And I will see you all then. Have a good day, folks.
Thank you. I have a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
So when doing our like writing assignments, what are you looking for as far as like responding to our classmates?
So, for example, if you are like sometime, I believe this week you're doing the prove me right, prove me wrong, and I believe that you are doing the slang one. So, for example, if I'm going to respond to a classmate who writes a slang word, for example, something that I haven't heard or something that I have heard and used differently, I would say, wow, like, that's really interesting. I had never heard of the slang term.
Okay.
You did a good job at explaining it. Or, wow, I've never used it like this. I didn't know you could use that word in that sentence. Or, wow, you and I used it the same way. Or I have a different definition or something. And it just kind of like engaging in a conversation, kind of like what we would in a class.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
So I'm not looking for like a super elaborate answer. I just want to see interaction so that you get to know your classmates through
opinions. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Are we gonna do more of like recorded like answering questions or things like how we did in our intro?
We will. So
Okay.
next week, we are like halfway through the session already. So next week, we will get your guidelines for the visual argument paper. And for the visual argument paper, you are going to be writing a paper and you're going to be recording a presentation using Flipgrid as well.
Okay.
And next week should be really fun because I'm actually going to be running through an advertisement with y'all so that I can help you understand how to do it.
When I know I'll probably ask this question, but now that I'm thinking of it, when doing that would be our midterm, right? The assignment,
For midterm, you do have a midterm exam as well.
Okay.
And your visual argument paper is just like another assignment. So your midterm is next week and your study guide will be going up at the end of this week.
Okay.
So I will be posting like a study guide for you all, and I'll probably go over it with you on Thursday. So that will be going up this week. And next week, you have a couple of assignments. So you're getting your topic approved for your visual argument paper, and you are taking your midterm exam for next week. The week after that is when you actually do the recording and the paper. So on week 4.
Okay. Is there anything that you want us to avoid when thinking of a topic for?
Just make sure it's not something that's too old, like something that is more than 5 years old would be an advertisement or a meme that's way too old. It has to be something within the last 2 to 3 years max.
Okay. Okay. And then as far as like for our Flipgrid presentation, is there certain things you would like us to avoid when talking and presenting our
So just
argument?
basically like try, so I need to be able to hear it. I need to be able to see your
Mm-hmm.
face and just not have too much distractions in the background if you can as much
Okay.
as possible, and
Mhm.
answer the questions that will be provided for you on the assignment as well.
Okay. And then you said we're having an exam, right? So is that going to be in similar style where we get to like write in our response?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's like the quiz.
perfect. Yeah.
And again, I
Okay.
will provide you with a study, kind of
Yeah.
like a study guide to help you focus, to help you just like study the terms that I want you to focus on, because I don't want
Okay.
you to waste time studying other stuff that's not going to be in it.
Right, right. Okay. I think those are all the questions I have.
Awesome. If you have
Thank
anything
you.
else, just email me.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Professor, I have a question too about
Yes, Andrew.
the 15-minute like paper assignments, like the quizzes in a sense.
Of course.
Would you suggest kind of taking both of them after like Thursday's lesson, or like could we take two right now and then take three after Thursday?
Yes. So 2 is based on chapter 3 and 4, and 3 is based on chapters 5 and 6. So you can take 2, and if you want, you can wait to take 3 after Thursday's lesson.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.